Girls, what is your he seemed normal on the first date, but after that things got weird story. NSW. We met at a party. He was very funny and good looking. First date was amazing. We went to dinner, saw a live band, and went stargazing. Next date he becomes extremely pushy about sex and starts to go downhill from there. He tells me he can't wait to get me pregnant. He has fantasies about sucking my breasts while I'm lactating and in overalls. Didn't last much longer than that. Turns out he was starting to use M2. Sucking my breasts while I'm lactating and in overalls. At least he has goals. Right after he picked me up, he ran into Walgreens really quick and asked to put his bag in my purse. Naughtily I assumed he bought candy since we were going to the movies. Nope. Right after the opening previews started he pulled out a brand new hairbrush, rips the packaging off, does a fake yawn to put his arm around me while holding the brush and starts brushing my hair. I didn't move because I was shocked that it was happening and didn't know what the frick to do. He then leans his head on my shoulder while still brushing my hair and starts smelling my hair. That was the last time I did not drive and meet on first dates. If you're into something weird like that, don't be a dong and pull that crap on a first date at the movies without talking to them about it. At least it was a new brush and didn't have his previous victim's hair in it. I joined OkCupid right around the time it started and talked to a seemingly nice guy on there for a little over a week before exchanging phone numbers. He had a good job, was attractive and funny, and just seemed like a cool guy all around. The first time we went out, we met at an art museum for a few hours and had great conversation. I left feeling good about it and we both agreed we should see each other again soon. Apparently his definition of soon was literally the next day. I had classes all the next day and didn't really get a chance to look at my phone, but when I did, I had 5 missed calls and at least 20 texts from this dude. The latter texts included things along the lines of B. Who the frick do you think you are to ignore me and waste my time? You're fat and ugly anyway and I never would have fricked you. I bet you have herpes. You dirty B. I was just like, what just happened? The old I'm desperate to talk to you and will text you 20 times. But you're fat ugly B and I'd never frick you. Context. My dad is a police officer and I had a very sheltered, possibly a little goody two-shoes of a childhood in a little town full of elderly folks and young families. Met him at a party, and we hit it off because we're from the same little town. First date went really well, wonderful dinner and a movie thing. I was really excited to have found someone after a rather long spell of singleness, so I agreed to a second date with no hesitation. After date 2, sushi and drinks, I get in his car for him to take me home and he tells me he lives with his grandmother because his mom has a serious H problem and will disappear for weeks at a time getting high and selling herself for money to feed her addiction. I thought that was already a pretty big bombshell for a second date, but he proceeded to tell me both his brothers were pretty deep into one of the Chicago gangs and had been arrested relating to crimes up to and including murder several times. I sat there for a beat, shocked, and he informed me that he'd told his brothers all about his new girlfriend and they wanted to meet me that weekend. I told him I wasn't comfortable with that and he started screaming at me about being a judgmental B and I promptly fled and blocked him on every platform I could think. Guy begged and whined for sex. I told him he sounded like a 5-year-old and I was going home. Because it wasn't pressuring or pushing like some men do. He was like a 5-year-old wanting to go to the circus at bedtime or something. We were in our 30s. To the guy's credit, I saw him out at an event and was just going to act like I didn't see him. No skin off my back. He didn't offend or hurt me, or even scare me. It was just weird. But he came up to me and apologized for his behavior. Even started off with something like, hey, I'm not going to bother you or anything. I just want to apologize. Followed by a legit apology. What he did was messed up and why. And then he left me alone. Kudos for owning up to it and apologizing when he could have just ignored me as it was a big event and it would have been easy to avoid each other. And it was unlikely we'd see each other again. He went from acting like a kid to acting like a super mature adult. This one is pretty mild but I didn't actually make it through the first date. We were at a coffee shop attached to a bookstore and everything started out pretty well. He was a little quiet, shy or nervous I assumed. but I coaxed some conversation out of him. After drinks, we started wandering around the bookstore, discussing our various interests. He asks me if I like Lord of the Rings. It's the first non-prompted question he'd asked. I say, oh yeah, like it. My favorite movie is the first one. The other two got a bit repetitive with the battles. He's silent for a moment. Lord of the Rings are my favorite movies ever, and the books as well. I read the books too. I reply conversationally. They weren't bad but not my favorites. He's silent again. Lord of the Rings is very important to me. I'm a little confused now. I like them. They're just not my all-time favorite thing. You know? Another long pause. His stare is oddly intense. Lord of the Rings is very important to me, and it's very important to me that you like it too. Well, you know, I say slowly, a bit cautious. We don't have to have exactly matching interests to be compatible. And I do like Lord of the Rings. I'm just not super passionate about it. That strangely cutting stare intensifies. It's really important to me that you like Lord of the Rings. At this point I simply shrugged and resumed browsing. But let me tell you, I wrapped that date up fast and lost his number immediately. Luckily, my lack of intense passion for Lotta was enough of a turn off that he didn't try for a second date. I don't know exactly what kind of bullet I dodged there, but I definitely dodged something. After my ex and I hooked up for the first time, he whipped out this Conair hairbrush and went to town on his balls. Apparently he had had it for years, said the bristles were nice and broken in. He said it was the only thing that could really give him a satisfying ball scratch. He would just lay in bed, pulling the skin out like a bat wing or something. I have never encountered another guy to do this, so for me it was pretty weird, but kudos for problem solving on his part. Definitely the Nazi. He seemed like a normal guy, pretty average, pleasant enough, good conversationalist. We both had an interest in distilling and we swung by his place after dinner to check out his absinthe setup. It wasn't one of those please come up and see my etchings sort of things either. It really was just going in to see his setup. As we walked through his trailer to get to the workshop where he made his spirits, I glanced at the pictures on the wall. Every one of them was historical photos of Nazis with himself photoshopped into them. The one I clearly remember was himself pointing out some sort of design element on a model tank or something to Hitler. A guy took me to an amusement park where he ended up flirting with 13-year-olds. Mind you, I was 18, but it was still creepy. Especially since he was 46. Guy took me out for drinks, seemed great, then asked me to move in 2 weeks later, then asked me for money for his phone bill, then bought me an iPad, and then I realized he was a drug dealer. Oops. Reading that was like going on an adventure. I had a couple normal dates with this guy I met on Tinder. The first we went to dinner and just walked around the city a bit and listening to music and rode on a Ferris wheel. The second I went over to his place and cooked us lasagna and we watched Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog. When we were planning the third date, he randomly says he can't make it after all and sends me this. It's just that I forgot that I'm a crap person. I'm an butthole and a liar. I'm boring. I hate literally everybody. I don't give a crap about anything. I don't care what happens to anyone, including myself. I think I'm better than everyone, but also hate myself. Bad person as in defective. Like a malfunctioning car engine is a bad engine. Although he was just out with some friends and one of them was playing a really bad prank. But nope. That was the last I heard from him. This sounds familiar. I've known people who can shift dramatically into a deep depression when good things happen to them. They feel they don't deserve happiness and deliberately sabotage it. They simply hate themselves with such vigor that they truly believe that being happy is a bad thing to be avoided. Granted, that one's pretty dramatic, but it happens. I honestly wish I knew what caused it. He introduced me to his 6-year-old daughter on our second date and noted he was worried she would have to marry a Mexican. No third date. Our daughter marrying Mexicans a big problem over there. I went out on a date with someone I met off POF. He was cute, seemed fairly normal. We met for coffee, went back to my place, yada yada yada. It was a good time. About a week later, a friend of mine in another state posted about how she found a high school classmate of hers on her state's sex offender registry. I decided to see if anyone I knew was on it, or if there were any living near me, so I did a search of my state's registry. Well, 3 guesses who I found on it. He has a common name, but I knew it was him because the picture on the registry was the same one he used on Plenty of Fish. There was no second date. Wait, he used his sex offender registry picture as his profile on POF. This was more than one date, but it was still pretty early in the relationship and is so weird, I thought it was worth sharing. Hope you guys agree. Not my story, but happened to a friend's sister. Friend and I were in college. Sister was mid-20s and getting serious with a new guy. He seemed fantastic and she was starting to think he was the one. After a few months, things started getting serious and he told her there was something important he needed to share. She's thinking he wants to move in or pop the question and getting pretty excited. Goes over to his place on the big night. Barely able to contain her excitement, at which point he shows her his secret room. It was really a walk-in closet, but he had it set up with a huge replica of Smurf Village and liked to play there in his free time. Like all of his free time. More than hanging out with friends or anything. Acting out storylines with his Smurfs and pretending he was one too. It was a big part of his life and he hoped she was as into it as he was. She was not. 50 Shades of Blue. I don't even know how to describe this date because it was so ridiculous. Our date was basically a 2-hour power walk around our town. I like walking as much as the next guy, but this guy insisted we keep walking the entire date because he thought sitting was a waste of time. Over the course of 1.5 hours, I learned that he hated noise, despite choosing to move to a noisy area, fat people, and would divorce his future wife if she ever started freeloading or got fat. How he's so smart. How people owe him because he was so nice to them. His car. How crappy and boring everything else was. How much he hated almost all music. How he thought everything was dirty and disgusting. Partway through the date I started laughing every time he said he hated something, which made him mad, which made me laugh more, which made him more mad. Finally he started taking digs at me, despite having already made it clear that he thought everything I was doing was dumb and that my arms were kind of hairy for a girl. That's when I tried to nope the frick out. His car was parked near my house, so we walked there together, and that's when he invited me to sit down. Apparently he wanted to wait the 30-some minutes until the meter ran out and didn't want to be by himself. Best date ever. He seemed normal on OkCupid. We had chatted a few times on Skype and watched Doctor Who in the span of a week. Then I met him in person, and it went downhill. He talked to me about what we would be doing for the holidays, and what we would name our kids, and outlined our future. I'm into some interesting things. He tried pulling my hair in public. I was super not happy with that. He even showed me a picture of a piece of jewelry he had bought me, with my name on it. When I told him I didn't think it was going to work out, he called and asked me to give him another chance, and he wanted to know what he would do with the necklace he bought me, and if I still wanted him to give it to me. The next day, I got a call from a lady friend of his that told me he had gotten in a car crash. He was the one hit, and that he had mentioned my name, so she thought we were super close and dating, and asked if I wanted to visit him in the hospital. I felt awful, but I didn't go. I knew if I did, it would only encourage or justify his feelings for me. PFFT, there was no car crash. Okay, so I was first introduced to him as my parents' friend's son, and my parents were gushing about how he's such a great church-going guy and will definitely take care of me, and make sure I'll behave while I was alone in LA for college. I was 16 and had no family there. He was 20. We hung out a couple of times. Seems normal. He asked me out and I said yes as a frick. To my parents. First date was okay. He seemed normal. Really quiet. Shy and awkward. But it was adorable. Second date. He comes off as pretty intense. Told me he attempted suicide just because his ex dumped him. She wasn't cheating or anything. It just didn't work out. Okay, a bit TMI, but still okay. We kissed at the end of the night, and he told me he wanted to put a baby in me. I crap you not. His exact words were, "I want to put a baby in here." Rubs my stomach. Oh heck number. I was pretty creeped out by now. So I was trying to figure out how to dump him gently. I was still 16, so I was still nervous about dumping people. Plus, he was the only person I knew in the US since I just moved. All my friends were still overseas, so I emailed them for help. The next day, I was walking in between classes when I ran into him. My college is in LA. He lives in Irvine, and that's about 1-2 drive away. I never told him my class schedule. Apparently from stalking my Facebook wall, snippets of conversation I had with him, and checking the university's list of classes, he figured out what classes I was taking and where they were located. What the frick? He proudly told me this as if it's the most romantic thing ever. I told him I'm not skipping Calc 2 for him since that class is dang hard, but he wouldn't leave until we hung out. He asked if he could borrow my laptop to finish some homework, so I dumped him in my dorm room. He actually read through my emails. I forgot to log out, and found the email I wrote to my friends, where I told them how creepy he was. I came back to the room. He promptly threatened suicide. I was stuck with him for 3 more months before I finally can't give a frick anymore and dumped him. He did attempt suicide, and sent me pictures of it, as well as a long essay detailing what he did. I wish I can feel guilty, but I really have no fricks left to give. Started talking about marriage and what he expected out of a good wife. I knew him for 2 weeks tops. It wasn't even like a passionate OMG I need to have you kind of thing. He was just methodically and surgically trying to wife me. Went out with a guy who seemed normal. I'm private, so he didn't know where I lived. Social media, nothing but my phone number, which was just a burner as I was living in Paris and needed something cheap to communicate. End of the first date, we start discussing politics and religion. We held different viewpoints but were both calm and rational. It never got heated. Next day he sends me multiple, long paragraph texts saying he didn't like argumentative women, that I was dumb barking CMW who needs to get raped. No man wants a woman who debates him. Legit quote. Flooded my WhatsApp with extremely long paragraphs of that nature. I lean on the detached side, so I laughed and blocked him. An hour later he sent me more deranged messages. On Facebook again he didn't have any of my social media info and my FB is under a different name with a random email address. Frick UB, don't ignore me. Fricking CM dumpster W skank blah blah. Slightly alarmed I blocked him. Next day my email, the one I use for friends and family, is flooded with messages by him. My Instagram, not connected with my email or Facebook, and is under random username, was flooded with his comments. Somehow he gets my real US phone number and sends me text saying he found out where my metro stop was, knew the area my house was in. That freaked me out. Somewhere in there he mentioned how he hates American B, how the last American W put him in jail when he was last in the US studying as an international student. Anyway, I would have went to the police, but I was leaving for Portugal the following week, so I just kept him blocked on everything and changed my US number. When I read stories like this, it just amazes me how freaking stupid and scary people can be. I once went on a date with a guy who I'd known from high school. He was a dong at the time, but hey, people change. Thought I'd give him a chance. He spent the whole time telling me all about the takedown techniques he learned in his failed attempt to become an RCMP officer. I'm sorry, but telling a girl how you could literally kill her in 5 seconds isn't great first date conversation. Literally kill her in 5 seconds. Did you reply I wish you would? We get back to my apartment. He drove. We're sitting in the parking lot and he asks me to grab his phone out of the glove department. I open it up and there's a gun and 2 knives. I begin getting out of the car and he gets out as well. I assumed he was walking me to my door, but then he follows me inside and sits down on the couch. He asks me to sit next to him and begins twirling my hair and singing a lullaby. I told him that I had some plans later and thanked him for the date, to which he responds, perfect, I'd love to go to the get together with you. I then panic and tell my mom to call me and ask me to come over. She calls, and I tell him I have to go. He says he'll drive. I let him know that it's a family emergency and that I should go alone. He seems rather pee about this, but says okay. We both go outside and I drive away. My roommate texts me and asks what's going on because he's sitting in the parking lot outside on the hood of his car. I wait at my parents' house for an hour and he's still sitting in our parking lot. but's in his car now. I end up spending the night at my parents' house, and he slept in his car waiting for me. I came home the next morning and he is awake and sitting on the hood of his car again, and asks me if I'm ready to get breakfast together. I had met a guy online, and everything seemed to go okay. We chatted and it turned out we had a lot in common. He wasn't a drinker, so we met at Starbucks for coffee. He seemed like a nice guy, friendly, and was definitely up there in second date territory. Suddenly, he asked me if my boobs were real or fake. It was so abrupt. I was more weirded out than anything. I didn't think that was a pertinent question, so I brushed it off. He went off on a 30-minute speech on how fake boobs were a sin on girls and why they were the downfall of the female gender. I wondered how scarred was he by breast implants, and he declared that if we wanted to embark on a relationship, I couldn't lie to him about my breasts, because you know, everyone always makes long-term plans on the first date. I was about to duck out when he reached over to verify that mine were real. When I smacked his hand away, he got super offended and I booked it home. Texts of apology and request for another date came up, but I ignored him. Thank goodness my following online encounter wound up in a more positive note. First date. He tried to feel me up and go for it. I was like nah. He was like, but I think I love you. Nope nope nope. Classic schmozzaby. My time has finally come. I casually dated this friend of a friend. They said he had recently broken up with his GF, though they had been in an LDR for a while. I attributed some of his early behavior to that. He seemed nice enough, pretty shy, on our first 2 dates. Said he was a bartender at a pretty hot bar in our city. I found out later he was 2 seconds from getting fired from his dishwashing gig at a Bill Miller's. He said he lived in some studio apartments downtown. He lived with his grandparents. These were all pretty big lies, but my birthday was when things came to a head. He told me he was taking me to a nice place for lunch. He took me to an IHOP. I was disappointed but ate without saying anything. He ate a ludicrous amount of food, then told me he didn't have any money. I was pissed off, but we had taken my car and he said he wanted to make it up to me. I said he could by letting me do what I wanted all day. He said he couldn't go home then and could I please take him with me? I ended up driving to a yarn shop downtown. He was twitchy and uncomfortable every step of the way. I finally asked him WTF was wrong. He said, I killed a man in this neighbor. His brother's been looking for me around here ever since. It's why I try to stay away from downtown at all times. At that point I just said, I thought you lived and worked in this area. He came up with some fast excuses but I'd had enough and he was honestly starting to freak me out. So I just dropped him off at our friend's place and told him I couldn't deal with him anymore. Honestly, it was more like hanging around a troubled kid than any kind of romantic situation. That is far from the only story I have. Okay, he tells you he killed a man and you're calling him out on lying about where he works. Pretty soon after ending a long-term relationship I started getting to know this guy on Tinder. He seemed sweet and our first few dates were actually pretty wonderful. It seemed like he was trying to do the whole rom-com date style, snowy walks in town ending in snowball fights and hot cocoa etc. About a month into seeing him I left for Australia where I was contracted to work for 4 months. During that time one of my close friends from high school killed himself. When I told the guy he got upset because I wouldn't Skype him, saying things that, direct quote, I was wallowing too much and that suicide was stupid and only cowards did it. I stopped talking to him for a while. I ended up speaking to him one more time once I was more comfortable with the events that unfolded. He then proceeded to tell me I'd be more attractive if I wore more makeup and changed my naturally curly hair for straight hair, and to wear jeans instead of my normal skirts and dresses. Needless to say I wasn't interested in a relationship with him anymore. He still messages me on Facebook trying to get my sext him. What a scumbag. When I moved into my first walk up in the city, I had a rear bedroom that looked out onto the backs of a bunch of other buildings. I was new to urban living and not as diligent about curtain security as I should have been, and one day glanced out the window as I was getting dressed to see one of my fellow rear-facing neighbors jacking it. I might have squealed and dived for a towel but this dude just cheerfully waves to me and keeps going with the other hand. Because of the frame I couldn't really see his face but I noted what window it was in this ivy covered building and warned my roommate about it. I got better about closing the curtains. Maybe 6 months later I'm sitting in this local bakery, having a coffee and reading Cloud Atlas. A guy very politely excuses himself for interrupting but says he's a huge David Mitchell fan, and we end up talking about books over caffeine for a few hours. Literate, polite, easy on the eyes. Asked me out for wine a few days later. First dude in the city that's asked me out sober. This meet cute is already becoming canon in my head. We have our date. It starts well, but he is slamming down the sauce. We had ordered a bottle of wine, and by the time I finished my first glass, the bottle was gone and he was partway into another. Maybe first date nerves, but he starts slurring and giggling and I get annoyed. I tell him I have an early meeting and he insists on walking me out. I figure out exactly how drunk he is when he falls down the gosh darn restaurant stairs. I'm trying to help him up and he just keeps saying, "You're so pretty. So pretty. Prettier than I thought." Okay, rude much? I tell him no one wants to hear that, booze makes them more appealing, and he gets all apologetic. But that was not what he meant. The first time I saw you in your apartment I thought you were good looking, but it's hard to see through the glass. Then I met you in the coffee shop and you're really pretty. What do you mean through the glass? The idiot is still sitting on the sidewalk. By the way, remember? You saw me, and I waved. Oh lord, I just went on a date with my own neighborhood publicly masturbating peeping Tom. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.